Single mom defends a little girl from a cruel stepmother, but when she discovers who the girl is, her life changes forever. Comment and give my story a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. A light morning drizzle cast a grey veil over the bustling streets of a working-class neighborhood in the sprawling metropolis of Chicago, where a single mother in her 30s hurried toward the small clothing boutique where she worked as a sales associate. Her dark brown hair swayed with each determined step, while her hazel eyes carefully scanned her surroundings. It was a habit she'd developed over the years, raising her 4-year-old son alone. Constant vigilance, a compulsive need to protect and observe anything that might pose a danger. The shrill sound of yelling and insults made her stop abruptly at the corner of Main Street. Across the street, near a busy bakery, a disturbing scene unfolded before dozens of passers-by who pretended not to see. An elegant woman, dressed in expensive clothes and sparkling jewelry, tightly gripped the thin arm of a frail child who appeared to be only 2 years old, although her features suggested she was slightly older. The girl trembled in the light rain, her clothes tattered and unsuitable for the chilly weather. Her disheveled blonde hair clung to her pale face, while silent tears streamed down her rosy, cold, chapped cheeks. The elegant woman shook her violently, shouting cruel words that echoed down the street. "You're useless, an unwanted burden that only brings me trouble. Beg harder, or we'll go home with nothing to eat today." The cruel stepmother barked, pushing the child toward the pedestrians who hurried by, avoiding eye contact. The single mother felt her heart race wildly. Her hands began to tremble, not from the cold, but from the growing fury that consumed her. She immediately thought of her own son, the daily struggle to protect him from all the world's adversities, the tireless dedication to ensuring he grew up safe and loved. Seeing that defenseless child treated with such cruelty awakened a maternal instinct in her that transcended any rational consideration. She took a deep breath, trying to control the storm of emotions brewing within her chest. She knew that getting involved could have serious consequences for her own life, already fraught with financial difficulties. Her situation was precarious. Her salary from the store barely covered basic expenses, and any additional problems could result in losing her job or facing legal complications she couldn't afford. But when she saw the cruel stepmother raise her hand to strike the child, all her fears and worries vanished. She ran across the street, dodging cars that honked angrily, and reached them with her heart pounding. "Stop that right now!" she shouted in a firm voice that surprised even herself. "That child doesn't deserve to be treated like that." The cruel stepmother turned around with an expression of absolute fury, her dark eyes flashing with disdain. She was an imposing woman, with aristocratic features that revealed a life of privilege. Her perfectly manicured blood-red nails contrasted with the paleness of her well-cared-for hands. "Who do you think you are to interfere in matters that don't concern you?" she snarled, squeezing the girl's arm even harder, causing her to let out a low whimper of pain. "This ungrateful child belongs to me, and I'll do with her as I please. No child belongs to anyone to be mistreated like that," the single mother retorted, positioning herself protectively between the woman and the girl. "You're hurting her." The crowd that had previously pretended to ignore the situation now watched the confrontation intently. Some whispered among themselves, others took out their phones to record, but no one approached to help. The single mother felt completely alone in that moment, facing an adversary who clearly possessed more resources and influence. "You don't know who you're messing with," the cruel stepmother said with a sinister smile. "My husband is a very influential businessman in this city. He has connections that can destroy the lives of insignificant people like you in a matter of hours." For a moment, the single mother hesitated. The woman's words echoed in her mind like a dark warning. She thought of her son waiting at home, the bills to pay, the precarious stability she had taken years to build. But when she looked down and saw the girl's blue eyes filled with fear and silent hope, she knew she couldn't back down. "I don't care who your husband is," she replied with renewed determination. "What you're doing is wrong, and I won't pretend I don't see it." The cruel stepmother let out a cold, calculating laugh. She yanked the child forcefully, causing her to stumble. "You'll regret interfering today. My husband will hear about this, and when he finds out who you are and where you work, your miserable life will become even worse." She turned to leave, but before she did, she cast one last venomous glance. "And as for this little pest, she'll go back where she belongs, away from people like you, who don't understand how the world really works." As they walked away, the single mother remained standing in the middle of the wet sidewalk, watching the increasingly smaller figure of the child being dragged down the street. Her heart weighed like lead, and a feeling of powerlessness overwhelmed her. She had tried to do the right thing, but now she would face the consequences of her protective impulse. She arrived at work 20 minutes late, her clothes still damp from the rain and her mind disturbed by the images of that morning. Throughout the day, she couldn't concentrate on sales. The girl's haunted blue eyes seemed to follow her everywhere, and the cruel stepmother's threatening words constantly echoed in her thoughts. When she finally arrived home in the late afternoon, she found her son playing peacefully in the small apartment they shared. The boy ran to hug her with the innocent smile that always brightened her toughest days, but this time she couldn't reciprocate his enthusiasm with the same energy as always. That night, lying in her narrow bed, the single mother couldn't sleep. The cruel stepmother's threats weighed on her like a dark cloud, but it was the image of the child's suffering that tormented her the most. She knew she had aroused the wrath of powerful people, and she feared the consequences it could bring to her family. But a part of her, the maternal and protective part that defined who she really was, didn't regret intervening. What she didn't know was that this chance encounter would completely change the course of her life, revealing secrets she couldn't have imagined even in her most disturbing dreams. During the following days, the single mother tried to resume her normal routine, but the image of that rainy morning wouldn't leave her mind. Every time she walked the streets on her way to work, her eyes automatically searched for any sign of the frail girl. It was as if an invisible force compelled her to check every corner, every square, every place where beggars used to position themselves. It was on a sunny Monday afternoon, 2 weeks after the first encounter, that she saw her again. The child was sitting on the cold ground near a public transportation station, wearing the same tattered clothes, now even dirtier and torn. Her small, bare feet were bruised and swollen, and an expression of absolute resignation had replaced the fear she had shown previously. The single mother cautiously approached, checking to see if the cruel stepmother was nearby. When she confirmed that the girl was alone, she knelt beside her, taking out a sandwich she had prepared for her own lunch from her bag. "Do you remember me?" she asked softly, extending the food to the child. The blue eyes slowly lifted, and a nearly imperceptible glimmer of recognition passed through them. The girl took the sandwich with her trembling little hands and began to devour it with a desperate hunger that broke the older woman's heart. "What's your name?" She tried again, but the child only stared at her in silence, chewing slowly as if she wanted to make that meal last forever. In the days that followed, the single mother began to make purposeful detours on her way to work, always carrying some extra food. She discovered that the girl appeared in different locations each day, sometimes near the central market, other times near the main square, but always alone, and always with the same neglected appearance. During one of these visits, she noticed something peculiar. A black luxury car slowly passed through the area where the girl was positioned, slowing down as if the driver were observing the situation. Through the dark glass, she could distinguish the silhouette of a tall man, but she couldn't see his face clearly. The first disturbing revelation came on a Thursday morning when the single mother discreetly followed the black car after it picked up the girl. Keeping a safe distance, she watched the vehicle cross the entire city until it reached the upscale neighborhoods, finally stopping in front of an imposing mansion with manicured gardens and ornate iron gates. Hidden behind some trees on the opposite side of the street, she saw the girl being led into the luxurious property. The contradiction was stark. A child who spent her days begging on the poorest streets of the city lived in one of the most elegant residences in the metropolitan area. Determined to better understand the situation, she began to observe the mansion at different times. During her discreet investigations, she discovered that the house was inhabited by at least 4 people. The cruel stepmother she already knew, a tall, distinguished-looking man who wore expensive suits, an elderly maid who tended the gardens, and the girl herself. It was during one of these vigils that she witnessed a scene that confirmed her worst suspicions. Through a partially open window on the ground floor, she saw the girl cleaning the floor of a large room, carrying buckets that were too heavy for her small size. Her movements were slow and tired, and when she dropped some objects on the floor, the cruel stepmother immediately appeared, shouting and gesturing aggressively. The single mother felt a growing revolt taking over her being. That child was not being treated as a family member, but as an unpaid servant. The luxurious mansion that should have represented comfort and security had become a prison where the girl was exploited and mistreated daily. That same afternoon she made a decision that would change everything. She waited until the cruel stepmother left the house in a different car and then approached the gates of the mansion. Through the bars, she called softly for the girl, who appeared timidly at the main door. "You don't have to live like this," she said in a firm but caring voice. "There are people who can help you, places where you would be treated with love and respect." The girl approached the gates with hesitant steps, her blue eyes showing a mixture of curiosity and fear. For the first time, she opened her mouth to speak, her voice coming out as an almost inaudible whisper. She said that if I run away, bad things will happen to me, that no one will want me because I'm different from other children. The single mother's heart squeezed upon hearing those words, loaded with pain and resignation. "That's not true. You're a beautiful child, and you deserve to be loved and protected." "But I have nowhere to go," continued the girl, her small hands gripping the cold bars. "She said that my real parents didn't want me, so they left me here." It was at that moment that an unexpected figure appeared on the property. The tall man she had seen earlier came out of the house and walked towards the gates. He was approximately 30 years old, with neatly combed dark hair and brown eyes that seemed to carry an immense weight. He wore an impeccable navy blue suit, but his expression was that of someone deeply disturbed. "What's going on here?" he asked in a deep, controlled voice, looking alternately at the single mother and the girl. "I was just talking to her," replied the woman, trying to remain calm in front of that imposing figure who was certainly the influential businessman mentioned by the stepmother. The man studied her face for a few seconds, and she noticed something strange in his eyes when he looked at the girl. It wasn't indifference or irritation as she expected. It was something much more complex, a mixture of guilt, recognition, and a deep sadness that he was trying to hide. "You should go," he said finally, but his voice didn't carry the threat she anticipated. "This situation is more complicated than it seems." "Complicated?" she retorted, feeling courage growing inside her. "A child being mistreated isn't complicated, it's simply wrong." The businessman remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the girl with a disturbing intensity. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost some of its initial authority. "There are things you don't understand. Family pressures, social expectations, commitments that were made long before any of us imagined the situation would reach this point." "What kind of commitment justifies a child's suffering?" she asked directly, her protective nature overcoming any fear of the consequences. The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He looked again at the girl, who watched the conversation with wide eyes, and for the first time since he appeared, his mask of control began to crack. "You need to leave now," he repeated, but this time his voice trembled slightly. "And you," he addressed the girl, "go back inside the house." As she walked back home that afternoon, the single mother couldn't get the businessman's expression out of her mind. There was something in his eyes that went far beyond simple complicity with the mistreatment. It was as if he was fighting something inside himself, an internal battle that she couldn't fully understand. That night, while helping her own son with his homework, she made a decision that would seal the fate of everyone involved. No matter the threats, the social divides, or the risks to her own stability, she would find a way to get that child out of the abusive situation, even if it meant facing the gravest consequences. Little did she know that her next actions would trigger a series of events that would reveal secrets buried for years, changing not only the girl's life, but completely transforming her own existence in ways she could never have imagined. The opportunity the single mother was waiting for came on a rainy Friday afternoon, when she discovered the girl hidden in a small abandoned shed at the back of the mansion property. The child was huddled between old boxes and rusty tools, shivering from the cold and with her face marked by recent tears. "What happened?" she asked softly, kneeling beside the girl and noticing a small cut on her forehead. "I accidentally broke a vase," the child whispered, her voice choked. "It was too heavy, and it slipped out of my hands. She got really mad and said I can't go back in the house until I learn to be more careful." The single mother felt a growing rage burn in her chest. The temperature was low, the rain was intensifying, and that child had been abandoned in a cold, damp place as punishment for an accident that was completely understandable for someone her age. "Are you hungry?" she asked, taking some cookies she always carried from her bag. The girl nodded timidly and accepted the food gratefully. As she ate, the single mother made an impulsive decision that would change everything. "Would you like to come with me to a warm place where you can take a bath and eat a real meal?" The child's blue eyes lit up with cautious hope, but they soon filled with fear again. "She'll be very angry if I leave here. Don't worry about that now. The important thing is that you're safe and warm." Carefully, she helped the girl up and guided her through the back of the property until they reached the street. Throughout the journey to her apartment, the single mother felt her heart race with the magnitude of what she had just done. Technically, she was taking a child without the authorization of her legal guardians, but her conscience wouldn't allow her to leave her in those deplorable conditions. When they arrived at the small apartment in the working-class neighborhood, her 4-year-old son ran to greet them. The reaction of the two children was surprising. They stared at each other for long seconds with an almost magnetic intensity, as if they were recognizing something familiar in each other. "This is my son," the single mother introduced, watching the curious interaction between the children. "Hi," said the boy with a genuine smile. "Do you want to play with me?" The girl nodded timidly, and soon they were sitting on the living room floor, sharing the few toys the family owned. The naturalness with which they interacted was impressive, as if they were old friends reuniting after a long separation. For the next 3 days, the single mother cared for the girl as if she were her own daughter. She gave her warm baths, clean clothes borrowed from her son, and nutritious meals that the child devoured with touching gratitude. With each passing day, the girl seemed to blossom, gaining a little more color in her face and demonstrating a sweet and intelligent personality that had been suppressed by the abuse. But the peace wouldn't last long. On Monday morning, as the single mother prepared to leave with the 2 children, violent knocks on the door echoed through the apartment. When she opened it, she was confronted by the cruel stepmother, accompanied by 2 men in suits who were clearly lawyers. "I told you you'd regret interfering where you weren't wanted," the woman said with a venomous smile. "You kidnapped a minor, and now you're going to face the legal consequences." "Kidnapped?" the single mother replied, feeling the ground move beneath her feet. "I just protected a child who was being mistreated." "You have no proof of mistreatment," one of the lawyers interjected with a cold, professional voice. "But we have evidence that you removed the child from the property without the authorization of her legal guardians. That constitutes a crime under the penal code." The girl, who had hidden behind the sofa with the boy, began to cry silently. The single mother looked at her and then at the cruel stepmother, feeling her soul break as she realized she had no choice. "If you return the child now and promise never to approach our family again, we won't proceed with the charges," the lawyer continued. "But if you insist on interfering, we guarantee you'll lose your job, your home, and possibly custody of your own child." The final threat was like a devastating blow. The single mother looked at her son, who watched the scene with wide eyes of fear, and knew she couldn't risk losing him. With tears in her eyes, she knelt beside the girl. "You need to go with them now," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "But remember that you're special, and you deserve to be loved. Never forget that." The girl hugged her with desperate strength, whispering "thank you" repeatedly before being led out of the apartment. The single mother watched from the window as they got into a black car and disappeared down the busy street. For the next 2 weeks, she lived in constant torment. Her nights were filled with nightmares where she saw the girl suffering, and her days were haunted by the guilt of not having been able to protect her adequately. Her son also showed signs of distress, constantly asking when the girl would come back to play with him. It was during this dark period that she received an unexpected visit. The businessman appeared at her door on a rainy afternoon, wearing casual clothes and with a tormented expression that contrasted drastically with the authority he had demonstrated previously. "Can I come in?" he asked with a hesitant voice. "I need to talk to you about the situation." She led him to the small living room, offering him a simple coffee that he accepted gratefully. For long minutes they remained silent until he finally began to speak. "You need to know that I don't agree with what's happening," he said, his hands trembling slightly as he held the cup. "But there are complex situations involved that prevent me from acting directly." "What kind of situations justify the suffering of an innocent child?" she asked with a mixture of anger and despair. He took a deep breath before answering, as if he were preparing to reveal something painful. "My family has very specific expectations about my future. There's an arranged marriage that would consolidate our businesses, social connections that I can't simply ignore." "And does that have anything to do with the girl?" "More than you imagine," he replied, running his hands through his hair in a clear demonstration of anguish. "Her situation is directly connected to the pressures I face." During the conversation, the single mother noticed something interesting. He carried a small photo of a blonde child who appeared to be the same age as the girl she had tried to protect in his wallet. When she asked about the photo, he closed the wallet quickly, but not before she noticed his eyes filling with tears. "I lost someone very important 2 years ago," was all he said about the matter, but the pain in his voice was unmistakable. In the following days, the businessman began to visit her regularly, always bringing groceries and checking how she and her son were adapting after the traumatic situation. These visits revealed a completely different personality from the one she had observed initially. He was kind, attentive, and demonstrated a genuine interest in their well-being. During one of these conversations, he mentioned casually that he had hired a private investigator to check some inconsistencies related to the girl's situation. When she asked what kind of inconsistencies, he was evasive, saying only that some things about the official story didn't make sense. "There are documents that should exist but don't, and others that exist but shouldn't," he explained enigmatically. "I'm starting to suspect that the situation is much more complicated than any of us imagined." The last revelation of that period came when the single mother discovered, through casual conversations with neighbors of the mansion, that the businessman used to be seen looking at the girl through the windows with an expression of deep suffering. One of the neighbors mentioned that he seemed haunted whenever the child was around. This information, combined with the mysterious photo and the investigations he was conducting, planted a seed of suspicion in the single mother's mind. There was something much deeper happening in that situation. Secrets that went beyond the simple case of an adopted child being mistreated. When the businessman appeared at her door that Friday night with a desperate expression and his hands trembling visibly, she knew that the revelations he brought would change everything forever. "She's in the hospital," were the first words that came out of the businessman's mouth when the single mother opened the door. His face was pale, and his rumpled clothes suggested he had spent hours without sleep. "The girl fainted this morning. The doctors said it's severe malnutrition combined with extreme stress." The single mother felt her world collapse. Her worst suspicions were confirmed. The child's situation had deteriorated drastically since she was forced to return her. "How is she now?" she asked, grabbing her coat without hesitation. "Stable, but weak. Very weak." He ran his hands over his tired face. "I took her to the hospital personally. I couldn't stand by and watch that situation any longer." During the drive to the hospital, he revealed that he had finally confronted the cruel stepmother about the mistreatment, resulting in a violent argument that exposed secrets kept for years. "She admitted that the girl wasn't officially adopted," he said in a tense voice. "Apparently, she was brought to our house 2 years ago through unofficial channels, and since then, she's been used as free domestic labor." At the hospital, the single mother came across the girl lying in a small bed, connected to IVs and medical equipment. Her blue eyes were closed, and her breathing was weak but constant. When she approached the bed, the child opened her eyes slowly and managed a weak smile. "You came," she whispered in a hoarse voice. "Of course I came. I promised you would always be important to me." It was at that moment that the doctor in charge of the case entered the room, carrying exams and reports. He was an elderly man with a kind appearance, but his expression was grave. "The tests revealed some interesting things," he said, addressing both her and the businessman. "In addition to malnutrition, we found a very distinctive birthmark on the child's right shoulder." The businessman paled even further upon hearing those words. His hands began to tremble visibly. "What kind of mark?" asked the single mother, noticing his strange reaction. "A butterfly-shaped mark, very small but very characteristic. It's the kind of mark that appears in less than 1% of the population." The businessman got up abruptly from the chair, walking to the window of the room. When he turned around again, his eyes were filled with tears. "My daughter had a mark exactly like that," he said in a broken voice. "She disappeared 2 years ago. I was told she had passed away, but I never completely believed that version." The revelation fell on the room like a lightning bolt. The single mother looked alternately at the businessman and at the girl in the bed, beginning to connect pieces of a terrible puzzle. "You think she could be—" "I don't know what to think anymore," he replied, approaching the bed cautiously. "But the similarities are too disturbing to be a coincidence." The doctor suggested they do DNA tests to clarify the situation, and both the businessman and the single mother agreed immediately. While they awaited the results, which would take a few days, she decided to conduct her own investigations. It was rummaging through the mansion's trash in the early hours of one morning that she found documents that would change everything. Among discarded papers, she discovered contracts from an organization that facilitated domestic placements of orphaned children, documents revealing monthly payments made by the family to the organization, and, most shockingly, falsified certificates that altered the girl's original identity. With this evidence in hand, she confronted the businessman, who was devastated to realize the extent of the scheme in which his family had participated, even if unconsciously. "They told me she was an orphan and needed a home," he said in a broken voice. I was so shattered by the loss of my daughter that I agreed to help another child. I never imagined it was an exploitation scheme. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. When the DNA results arrived, they confirmed that the girl was, in fact, the businessman's biological daughter. The child, who had been declared gone 2 years ago, was alive and had spent all that time being mistreated right under her own roof. "How is that possible?" asked the single mother, trying to process the information. The subsequent investigation revealed that the cruel stepmother had orchestrated the entire scheme. After the child's disappearance, she had waited an appropriate period before suggesting that they adopt an orphan to help the businessman overcome his pain. She had deliberately chosen his own daughter, but altered her appearance and identity so that the father wouldn't recognize her immediately. "Why would she do something so cruel?" questioned the single mother. "Money," replied the businessman bitterly. "My daughter's inheritance was substantial. If she had been declared alive, the money would remain in trust until she came of age. But with her gone, the resources became available for family management." The second devastating revelation came when the single mother discovered, through old hospital records she found among the discarded papers, that she herself had given birth to twins 4 years ago, but had been deceived about the survival of one of the children. The hospital had recorded that one of the babies hadn't survived childbirth, but later documents showed that the child had been sold to the same organization that later placed her in the businessman's home. The girl she had tried to protect was, in fact, her own daughter. When they confronted the hospital records with the help of the businessman, who was now using his financial resources to fully investigate the scheme, they discovered that several families had been victims of the same criminal organization. Children were separated from their families through hospital fraud and then placed in situations of domestic exploitation. "That means," she began, looking at the girl, who was now resting peacefully in the hospital. "That she's both of our daughter," completed the businessman with a voice full of emotion. "You gave birth to her. I contributed genetic material through the donation program I participated in years ago, but neither of us knew about the connection until now." The final revelation came when they checked the fertilization program records. The businessman had been an anonymous donor at the same hospital where the single mother had undergone her treatment after discovering she had difficulties getting pregnant naturally. They never met during the process, but destiny had connected their lives in an extraordinary way. With all the evidence gathered, the cruel stepmother and her accomplices were exposed to the authorities. The criminal organization was dismantled, and other families were reunited with their lost children. The businessman called off his arranged marriage and, together with the single mother, struggled to rebuild the life of the girl, who now knew she was the biological daughter of both of them. The boy she had raised alone discovered he had a twin sister, explaining the instant connection he had felt with her. 6 months later, the two families moved into a spacious house where the 3 children grew up together. The businessman used part of his fortune, which included investments in stocks and diverse holdings, to create a foundation that helped other families victimized by similar schemes. The single mother, who had begun this journey simply trying to protect a vulnerable child, discovered that by following her maternal instincts, she had not only saved the businessman's daughter, but also found her own lost daughter. On the night they finally signed the mutual adoption papers, legally officializing what love had already built, she looked at the 3 children playing in the yard and knew that the most desperate moments of her life had been the path to the greatest miracles. Sometimes, the most improbable endings are born from the most painful beginnings, proving that true love always finds a way to reunite those who belong together. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.